Hello again. This is Matt Ballant, the author of The Valley of the Pharaohs. This is episode 2 of my series of videos on the game to give you more information and background and some insight into my thoughts and ideas about how to run a role-playing game using The Valley of the Pharaohs. In this episode, I'm going to go into a little more detail about the character races and the backgrounds. And this topic is really too large for one video. I don't want to have these videos be very extended. I'm trying to keep them to less than 30 minutes. So this will just be part one. And this information is useful to you as you're generating characters for the game. Now there's 8 character races in Valley of the Pharaohs, or Sirku. And Sirku is an ancient Egyptian term for people. And there's a hieroglyph of that word shown in the title bar. The 8 races are humans, called Rimu, dog or canine based, which are Asha, bird based, Apsu, crocodilian, Atu, snake, perfowl, frog, and to a certain extent toads as well, car, cats. This includes domestic cats as well as lions and leopards, wild large cats. They're called Mao. And cattle-based characters, or Sam. Now, each of the non-human characters has their own set of abilities, but in general, these godlike characters have a native form and a more human form. And they have the ability to switch between those two forms pretty much at will. And there's no restrictions, no cost to them. It doesn't take any special circumstances to do this. And they also all have the ability to become a smaller version of the actual creature that they're based on. So an Asha character, if needed to, or if they wanted to, could become a somewhat small dog, maybe 30-pound, 40-pound size, approximately. And the same with all of the other characters as well. So that introduces a certain dynamic to the game where, if needed, the humans in the party could have other party members in native, if you will, form and present themselves as pets of the human characters. You know, it depends on the situation, depends on what the party's trying to do. But there is that ability as well. They can switch between partial human, their native form, or the actual creature that they represent. Now, the idea behind these different animals is, again, Egyptian gods are most often portrayed as human figures with animal heads. Now, there's some exceptions to that, and most gods had many, many forms. They were depicted in different forms. So by no means is this true all the time, but most were animal-headed human forms. Some had tails, some not. Now, the humans are referred to as Rimu, which, again, that's an ancient Egyptian word. It means mankind, humankind. And there's a couple of different hieroglyphic representations of the word. these hieroglyphs are taken from the Budge Hieroglyphic Dictionary, which is a resource I highly recommend to anyone who's really interested in immersing themselves in this game. It's been an invaluable resource to me. And humans have a culture. Primarily, they're Egyptian or Kementi. And if you look at the chart on the screen, they have a 50% chance of being Egyptian. Again, this is just suggested. You can always throw these out and just choose. If you want to have a group that's all Greeks or Minoans or all Nubians, by all means do that. This chart is just provided for those who like to play more old school, where you have specific tables you roll from and you take what you get. But the other cultures represented in the game are the Nubians, the Mitanni, which are Hittites, Libyans, which are along the western side of Egypt in the desert and along the Mediterranean coast. Asiatics, and that's kind of a broad term from anyone who's in the Levant area or even up into modern day Turkey, Anatolia. They were often referred to as Asiatics by the ancient Egyptians. Desert dwellers, again, this is a more generic term the ancient Egyptians used. And these you can think of as, I guess, a modern day equivalent might be the Bedouins. They inhabit part of the Sinai and the eastern as well as western deserts outside of Egypt. And finally, the Minoan or Greeks, which are at this point in time, the Minoan culture was still very much alive, and the Greek civilization had not quite yet supplanted the Minoans, but they were great traders throughout the Mediterranean. So they're represented here as well. Now, each of these different cultures give you some bonuses. And again, this is why when you're creating a character, you're going to want to basically take notes on scratch paper. You don't want to pull out the character sheet and start writing on it because you're going to end up erasing many times. So it's best to just keep scratch paper and to keep track of these various options and abilities that you have. And then once you have your character fully fleshed out, then you can commit the information to a more permanent character sheet. But in general, if you're from a culture that's not Egyptian, you're going to get that particular language of that culture. Akkadian is kind of a broad term that was a diplomatic language used in the Mesopotamia at this time. Libyan, again, that was more in the Western desert. Nubia is to the south of ancient Egypt. Minoan is equivalent to the Greek of the time. And you'll notice on some of these, it talks about being able to choose different occupations regardless of the caste. And we'll get into that in more specifics, but in general, your caste restricts the occupational choices you have for a given character. However, depending on your culture, you may be able to still choose an occupation even though your caste would otherwise prevent it. One example might be, for example, soldiers. Generally, the bureaucracy and the priesthood, they can't be soldiers. They can't choose that as an occupation. However, if you have a Nubian character who happens to be from the bureaucratic or priestly caste, they could choose that occupation because of their cultural background. So, human characters in general, like I say here, have the least restrictions and the broadest abilities within the game. Um, and also, something to point out is just because your culture is not Egyptian doesn't mean you aren't considered a citizen of the empire, if you will. Now, you might choose to set up a campaign where everyone is a recent uh, uh, immigrant to the country, or say, been enslaved, you were captured during some campaign or whatever, and now you were brought to Egypt in certain circumstances. So you could choose to do that, but in general, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Uh, you could embellish your backstory. Maybe your family came from uh, Libya 200 or 300, 500 years previously, but you've maintained your culture over those years, but you're still considered Egyptian. I'll get into some of the character races. Let me just move my little video feed there. First is the Asha, or the dog-headed race. And these are considered akin to Anubis, who's probably one of the most famous Egyptian gods, considered a protector of the dead, a god in the underworld. And there's various attributes associated with these type of characters. First and foremost, they're very loyal to the group that they are in. And due to their association with Anubis, they generally will not desecrate the dead. Now, desecration doesn't necessarily mean they won't enter a tomb or something of that nature. It just means they're not going to go and tear a corpse apart looking for treasure. And they're not really going to, they're going to be very upset if people in the party do that. So it doesn't mean that they won't accompany the party on treasure hunting expeditions, but in general, they're not really comfortable with desecration of the dead. They receive hunting and land navigation skills automatically. And these are in addition to the number of skills that they start the game with. And again, we'll get more into that as these videos go on and we get more into the skills selection portion of the character creation. They also receive a bonus to detect odors. And these might be perception checks, or they might be what's called an attribute check. An attribute check, you can think of that as sort of a D&D type savings throw, and it's based on your attributes or a combination of your attributes, whereas perception is a skill in and of itself. And when I say +5, what that means is in general, you're trying to roll low on percentile checks. So if you had, say, a 40% perception skill, you want to roll 0, 1 through 40. That means you made the check. If you roll above 40, you fail. Now a +5, even though it's written as a +5, that doesn't mean you add 5% to the roll. It means you really can roll between 0, 1 to 45 in my example. So if you had a 40% skill, you really have a 45% skill in this. So throughout the rules, there's places where it'll say +5, and usually that means, again, that you either subtract it from your die roll or you add it to your chances of success. These characters also give the party an advantage when determining surprise in a combat situation. And this is just a one-time thing. So if you had a party that's all Asha characters, you don't get, like there's 4 characters, you don't get a +4. You just get a +1 if there's Asha in the party. And lastly, they also have in their natural or native form, they have a bite or a claw attack. So now they don't have that in their humanoid form. And you'll notice in the illustration, there's a male and a female character in their native form, as well as their more human form. In their human form, they could use a punch or fist, kick, that sort of thing, but they don't get any special bonuses or special attacks. It's only if they're in their native form. And these characters are restricted to soldiers, scholars, merchants, thieves, or laborers. The next race is the Apsu, or the bird-headed race. And these could be the player can choose if you want, or if for some reason a game master wants to designate this, they can designate it. But you can either be vulture, ibis, or hawk form. These are the only characters who can natively fly. In their native form, they have wings. These characters, in general, always tend towards order, or what's called Ma'at. The Egyptian society always valued order and was always looking to maintain order. I mean, in fact, the daily battle between Ra and Apep, or when Ra started to rise in the east, was considered the battle between order and chaos, and that occurred every day. So as a result, these characters won't associate with characters of lower alignments. Now, in this game, and again, we'll get to this, alignment is considered a spectrum. You don't have, say, chaotic evil or lawful good or any of those kind of designations. You have a spectrum, which is a numeric value between 1 and 100. And the higher the number, the more order-based the character is. And this is just a guideline for the players to use when they're playing their characters. Now, there is some effects within the game of alignment. There's certain supernatural beings who, again, they won't even talk to you if you're low alignment. Or there's some that they won't attack you if you're a low alignment. Say they're kind of evil themselves and they're looking for other evil associates. So if you're too high, they're going to attack you. But it's just meant to be a way to associate individual actions, not to necessarily dictate how a character should be played. These characters, they receive a bonus in reading and writing. However, these skills must be chosen. They're not automatically awarded to the character. They do receive a plus 5% on their perception skill. Perception, everyone has a perception skill, so that's not one that has to be chosen. They also have a beak or a claw attack when they're in their native form. And again, like I said, they could fly. There's information on that in terms of their rate of travel, how much they can carry, that sort of thing. We won't get into that here because it's just meant to be sort of an overview. These characters can be soldiers, priests, scholars, artisans, or craftsmen. The Atu are crocodile associated creatures, and they're normally considered to be followers of Sobek, which is the crocodile god of ancient Egypt. They're considered ferocious in battle and in the protection of their family. They're very, very protective of family, especially young ones. They will never willingly abandon anyone in combat, any one of their comrades or their team members in combat. They will always stay. They are able to hold their breath for upwards of 10 plus minutes without an attribute check. Normally, after a minute or so, normal characters would have to make an attribute check in order to maintain, say, being underwater or being in a otherwise suffocating situation. They automatically receive a swimming skill at plus 10 bonus. That's a racial skill. They also have a bite or tail attack, again, in their native form only. These characters are limited to soldiers, priests, thieves, or laborers. And that's it for today's video. I just want to let everyone know that if you know someone who wants to buy a copy of the game, currently it is available on my website at my store at concrowdesigns.com. And also, everyone who buys the game will receive a PDF copy free. That's part of the purchase. They can get a PDF copy. So that's it for today. I look forward to speaking with you soon in part 2 of the races.